Poor boy visits his rich cousin, and what he discovers leaves the millionaire father in shock. Ethan Miller clutched the gift wrapped in newspaper in his small hands, while his mother fixed his hair for the 5th time. At 9 years old, he had never set foot in a house as big as his Uncle Richard's, and the excitement of meeting his baby cousin mixed with the shame of the old clothes he was wearing. It was when the uniformed maid opened the golden gate that Ethan understood why his mother had cried the day before. His uncle had only allowed the visit after much insistence, claiming he didn't want strange people near his newborn son. The mansion in the upscale neighborhood of Los Angeles was impressive with its perfect gardens and imported cars in the garage. Ethan held his mother Angela's hand, who had worked as a seamstress to support her son ever since her husband had abandoned them years ago. "You can only stay for an hour," said Jennifer, Richard's wife, not hiding her disdain as she looked at the visitor's simple clothes. Richard Miller was 15 years older than Angela and had built a business empire after inheriting his father's factories. When he found out his sister-in-law was pregnant by a man who had abandoned her, he cut off contact, claiming he didn't want bad influences in the family. The meeting only happened because their mother, Mrs. Margaret, 72 years old, had begged from her hospital bed for the siblings to reconcile before it was too late. Ethan climbed the marble stairs, carrying his plastic magnifying glass, a gift he had received last Christmas and took everywhere. He had always been an observant child, noticing details that adults overlooked. The baby's room was a dream in shades of blue and gold. Jacob, just 3 months old, slept peacefully in the imported crib, surrounded by expensive toys he would never use at that age. Ethan approached slowly, curious to meet his cousin. When the baby opened his eyes, something caught his attention. A small mark on the child's neck, shaped like a crescent moon, identical to the one he himself had. "Mom, look," whispered Ethan, pulling down his t-shirt collar to show his mark. Angela turned pale when she saw the similarity. The marks were exactly the same, in the same position, with the same shape. A coincidence impossible to ignore. "Don't tell anyone about this, my son," she asked nervously, looking around as if the walls had ears. But Ethan had already noticed something else. In the open drawers of the room, he saw baptism photos, medical documents, and papers that his childish curiosity couldn't completely decipher. The maid accompanying them, a 50-year-old woman named Martha, seemed agitated. When Ethan mentioned the birthmark, she almost dropped the tray she was carrying. "We'd better go down soon," murmured Martha, avoiding looking directly at the boy. During the snack served in the main room, Ethan watched everything carefully. The tense conversations between the adults, Jennifer's uncomfortable glances, the way his uncle avoided talking about the baby. Richard tried to maintain his composure, but was visibly bothered by the presence of his sister-in-law and nephew. He only talked about business, avoiding any personal topics. "Jacob looks a lot like you when you were a baby, Richard," commented Angela, trying to break the ice. The observation seemed to bother the businessman even more, who quickly changed the subject. Ethan, with his magnifying glass in hand, continued exploring the details of the house. In the wall portraits, he noticed that all the family photos were recent. There were no old pictures of Richard and Jennifer together. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The first revelation came unexpectedly. While the adults were talking in the living room, Ethan went back up to the baby's room, drawn by a strange noise. He found Martha hurriedly arranging some papers that had fallen from a drawer. "What are these papers, Aunt Martha?" he asked with the typical innocence of a child. Martha hesitated for a moment, nervously glancing at the door. Then, as if making an important decision, she knelt down to Ethan's level. "You're a very smart boy, aren't you?" she said in a low voice. "Do you promise not to tell anyone what I'm about to show you?" Ethan nodded, intrigued. Martha showed him an old photo, yellowed with time. In the picture, a young man was holding a baby in his arms. The man had exactly the same eyes as Ethan. "Is this man my father?" asked Ethan, immediately recognizing the familiar features. "No, my dear. That's your Uncle Richard when he was young. And the baby." Martha paused, as if unsure how to continue. "Is the baby me?" Ethan's eyes widened. No, the baby is Jacob. This photo was taken just 3 months ago. Ethan was confused. How could an old photo show his uncle holding a baby who had been born recently? Martha noticed the boy's confusion and gently explained that sometimes families kept photos of special moments, but things weren't always as they seemed. "Why doesn't Uncle Richard like us, Aunt Martha?" asked Ethan, with the painful honesty of children. "It's a complicated story, my angel. Adults sometimes fight over things that seem important but really aren't." Ethan continued examining the room's objects with his magnifying glass. He found medical documents on the nightstand, reports he couldn't fully understand, but where he managed to identify some important information. Jacob's blood type was highlighted in one of the documents: O negative. Ethan remembered when he had to get tests done the previous year and discovered he had the same rare blood type. "Aunt Martha, why does Jacob have the same blood type as me?" The question caught Martha off guard. She knew much more than she could reveal, carrying a secret that could destroy the Miller family. Martha had worked for years at Cedars Medical Center before becoming a housekeeper. It was there that she learned details about the lives of many families, including information she should never have discovered. Some people are born with similar blood types. It's normal, Martha tried to explain, but her trembling voice betrayed that there was much more behind the coincidence. Ethan, despite his age, was intuitive enough to sense that the adults were hiding something important. He decided to investigate on his own, using his magnifying glass to examine every detail he could find. In his uncle's office, which he managed to peek into quickly while Martha was talking with other staff, he saw a thick folder with the name Jacob Medical Documentation. Inside were tests, prescriptions, and a document that caught his attention because it had many official stamps. Although he couldn't read everything, Ethan managed to identify some important words: fertilization procedure, anonymous donor, and a date that exactly matched the period when Jacob was conceived. His young mind began connecting dots that an adult might ignore: the physical resemblance between him and his cousin, the identical blood type, the adult's tension, the medical documents. When he went downstairs to say goodbye, Ethan noticed that his mother was visibly upset. Angela had taken advantage of her son's absence to speak privately with Richard, and the conversation hadn't been friendly. "Richard, I just want you to accept my son. He's not to blame for anything," Angela pleaded. "Your life is your responsibility, Angela. I can't get involved with the problems you created for yourself," Richard would reply coldly. "He's your nephew. He has the same family blood." "Family blood?" Richard laughed bitterly. "You don't even know who that child's father is." Ethan listened to part of the conversation hidden behind the door and felt his heart tighten. He'd always known he didn't have a father, but he never imagined it caused such shame for his uncle. On the way home, Angela was too quiet. Ethan noticed she was holding a damp tissue and avoided looking directly at him. "Mom, why doesn't Uncle Richard like me?" Ethan asked on the bus. Angela took a deep breath before answering. She knew she'd have to explain the situation to her son one day, but never thought it would be so soon. "Your uncle thinks our family isn't good enough to associate with them," she explained carefully. "But we're the same family, aren't we?" "Yes, my love, but sometimes people forget that." Ethan spent the following days thinking about everything he'd seen and heard. The magnifying glass had become his investigation tool, and he examined old family photographs that his mother kept in a shoebox. In the photos, he saw Richard and Angela's father, his grandparents, and noticed how family features repeated through generations. Ethan had the same expressive eyes as his grandfather and the same nose shape as Richard. But there was something else that intrigued him. In some old photos, he saw a young man he couldn't identify, someone who appeared next to Richard in college photos, but whom his mother never mentioned. "Mom, who's this guy in the photos with Uncle Richard?" Ethan asked, showing a picture where two young men smiled with their arms around each other. Angela turned pale when she saw the photograph. It was an image she thought she'd hidden forever, from a time when everything was different. "That was your uncle's friend. They studied together in college. He looks a bit like me, don't you think?" Ethan's observation left Angela speechless. It was true. There was an undeniable resemblance between the boy and the young man in the photograph. During the week, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the baby cousin and all the coincidences he'd discovered. He decided he needed to investigate further, but knew it wouldn't be easy to return to his uncle's mansion. The opportunity came when Mrs. Margaret, his grandmother, asked them to visit her at the hospital. Angela took Ethan along, and there they discovered Richard was also visiting his mother. "Ethan," Mrs. Margaret exclaimed when she saw her grandson, "how you've grown, my boy." The grandmother's joy contrasted with Richard's embarrassment, who clearly didn't expect to find his sister-in-law and nephew there. Ethan took advantage of the moment when the adults were talking to explore the hospital corridors. With his magnifying glass, he examined paintings, signs, and information that might give clues about the mysteries he'd uncovered. That's when he encountered Martha, the housekeeper from Richard's house, coming out of one of the hospital rooms. She was carrying a folder and seemed nervous. "Aunt Martha," Ethan ran to her. "What are you doing here?" Martha was surprised to see the boy, but quickly composed herself. "Hi, sweetie. I'm here for some routine tests. And you?" "Visiting my grandma." "Aunt Martha, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, dear." "Did you know my father?" The question caught Martha completely off guard. She looked around, making sure they were alone before answering. "Why do you want to know that, Ethan?" "Because I think there's something strange going on. Jacob looks a lot like me, and you got nervous when I talked about us having the same birthmark." Martha realized she was dealing with a much more observant child than she'd imagined. She knew Ethan deserved to know at least part of the truth. "Come here, let's sit for a bit," she said, guiding Ethan to a bench in the hospital hallway. "Ethan, you know your mom raised you alone, right?" "I know. She always told me my father left before I was born." "What if I told you that maybe your mom didn't exactly know who your father is?" Ethan was confused by the question, but his instinct told him he was about to discover something important. Martha continued, carefully choosing her words. "Sometimes when people really want to have babies but can't naturally, they seek special medical help." "What do you mean?" "Well, there's a place where women can get help to get pregnant, and sometimes young men help by donating. Well, they help in the process." Ethan didn't fully understand what Martha was trying to explain, but he sensed it was something related to babies being born. "Was Jacob born that way with medical help?" Martha nodded slowly. "And maybe you too, my dear." The revelation left Ethan silent for a few moments. His young mind tried to process the information. "Does that mean Jacob and I have the same—" Ethan stopped, not knowing how to finish the sentence. "It means you're more alike than anyone imagines." At that moment, Ethan understood why the adults were so nervous. He and Jacob weren't just cousins, they were brothers. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Martha realized she had revealed more than she should have, but she saw in Ethan's eyes a premature maturity that convinced her he could handle the truth. "Ethan, what I've told you needs to stay between us for now, okay? The adults are trying to resolve this situation as best they can." "But why is it a secret? If Jacob and I are brothers, isn't that a good thing?" "Yes, my dear. But sometimes the truth can hurt people who aren't ready for it." Ethan spent the rest of the visit deep in thought. When he returned to his grandma and the adults, he observed everyone's expressions with new eyes. Mrs. Margaret looked sad, but not surprised, as if she knew something the others hadn't yet discovered. Richard avoided looking directly at Ethan, but when he did, there was a strange expression in his eyes. No longer just coldness, but something that seemed like guilt. Angela was visibly shaken, whispering with her mother at the hospital bedside. "Mom, I don't know what to do anymore," Ethan heard her say. "Richard won't even listen to me." "Daughter, the truth always comes out, no matter what we do to hide it," Mrs. Margaret replied with the wisdom of her years. "But what if the truth destroys everything? What if it fixes what's been broken for years?" Ethan approached his grandma's bed, and she opened her arms to hug him. "Grandma, why doesn't Uncle Richard like me?" Mrs. Margaret looked deeply into her grandson's eyes before answering. "My grandson, your uncle doesn't like himself, and sometimes, when we don't like ourselves, it's hard to like others." "But I didn't do anything wrong." Of course not, my love. You're a wonderful, smart and brave child, and one day your uncle will realize that. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling of the small apartment he shared with his mum, thinking about everything he had discovered. Angela was restless too. Ethan could hear muffled sobs coming from her room. He decided to get up and keep his mum company. "Mum, can I sleep in your bed tonight?" Angela hugged her son, grateful for the company. "Ethan, do you want to ask me something about your father?" The question surprised Ethan. It was as if his mom knew he had discovered something. "Mom, is it true that I don't have a dad?" "You do have a dad, my love. It's just complicated." "Complicated how?" Angela took a deep breath. She knew she couldn't postpone this conversation any longer. "Ethan, when I was younger, I really wanted to have a baby, but I couldn't get pregnant normally. So I sought medical help. And then I was born? Then you were born, my miracle. And was Jacob born that way too?" The question left Angela silent. How did Ethan know about his cousin's birth process? "Who told you about Jacob?" "Aunt Martha. She said that he and I look alike because we have the same father, right, Mom?" Angela began to cry. She didn't expect the truth to come out so quickly. "Ethan, do you understand what this means?" "It means Jacob is my brother. It means you have a bigger family than you imagined. But why does Uncle Richard get mad about this? Shouldn't he be happy?" Angela explained that Richard and Jennifer didn't know the full truth. They believed Jacob was Richard's biological son. "So Uncle Richard doesn't know Jacob is my brother?" "He doesn't, and Aunt Jennifer doesn't either." "Won't they be happy when they find out?" "I don't know, my love. Sometimes adults react strangely to truths." Ethan was thoughtful for a few moments. "Mom, I think they need to know. It's not fair to hide it." "You're right, Ethan, but how are we going to tell them?" "I have an idea." The next day, Ethan asked his mom to call Richard. He wanted to propose a new visit, but this time with a specific purpose. "Uncle Richard, I'd like to give Jacob a present," Ethan said on the phone. "What kind of present?" asked Richard, surprised by the call. "It's a surprise, but I need to come to your house to deliver it personally." Richard hesitated. He didn't want any more encounters with his sister-in-law and nephew, but there was something in Ethan's voice that intrigued him. "All right, but just a quick visit." Ethan spent the afternoon preparing his plan. With his mom's help, he organized a simple presentation using family photographs and documents he had managed to examine. When they arrived at the mansion, Jennifer greeted them with the same coldness as before, but Ethan was determined to reveal the truth. "Aunt Jennifer, can I show you something?" "What is it, Ethan?" Ethan opened his backpack and carefully took out the photographs and documents he had organized. "I discovered something very important about me and Jacob." Richard and Jennifer exchanged glances, intrigued by the boy's seriousness. Ethan first showed the family photographs, pointing out the physical similarities between him and Jacob. Then, with a magnifying glass, he showed details that might have gone unnoticed. "Look at our birthmarks," he said, showing the photos he had asked his mom to take. "They're exactly the same." "It's a coincidence," said Jennifer, visibly uncomfortable. "And the blood type?" Ethan showed the medical documents. "Is that a coincidence too?" Richard began to turn pale. He recognized some of the documents Ethan was showing. "Ethan, where did you get these papers?" "I found them in Jacob's room. Uncle Richard, do you know what an anonymous donor is?" The question caught Richard completely off guard. Jennifer looked at her husband, confused. "Ethan, what are you trying to say?" she asked. "I'm trying to say that Jacob and I are brothers." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer looked at Richard for an explanation, while Angela held her son's hand, supporting his courage. "That's impossible," murmured Jennifer. "Jacob is our biological son." "Aunt Jennifer, Jacob is your son in your heart, but biologically he's my brother." Ethan explained everything he had discovered, with the surprising clarity of a child who had thoroughly investigated the facts. "You had the fertilization procedure using material from an anonymous donor. But the donor wasn't anonymous to my mum. It was the same person who helped her have me." Richard sat down heavily in an armchair. He knew Ethan was right, but he never imagined the truth would come out this way. "Jennifer," he said with a trembling voice, "I need to tell you something." The revelation that followed shook the foundations of the Miller family. Richard confessed that years ago, when he was young and needed money to pay for his studies, he had been a donor at a fertility clinic. "I didn't know Angela had used the same clinic," he explained. "When we found out we couldn't have children naturally, we sought medical help. I specifically asked to use material from the same donor who had donated when I was young." "You did this on purpose?" asked Jennifer, incredulous. "I wanted to make sure the child would be genetically from the Miller family. I didn't imagine there was another child." Jennifer began to cry. She felt deceived and betrayed, and she had believed all this time that Jacob was Richard's biological son. "Does this mean you've been lying to me for years?" "Jennifer, I didn't lie. I genuinely didn't know about Ethan." Ethan, seeing the adults suffering, approached Jennifer. "Aunt Jennifer, you don't stop being Jacob's mom because of this, and I don't want to take him away from you." The simplicity of Ethan's words deeply touched Jennifer. She looked at this boy who had come to her home as a stranger and now revealed himself to be the half-brother of the son she loved. "Ethan, do you understand this changes everything?" "It changes for the better, Aunt Jennifer. Now Jacob has an older brother to protect him." Richard was visibly shaken by the situation. His entire controlled and organized world had been turned upside down by a 9-year-old boy armed with a magnifying glass and endless curiosity. "Angela, why did you never tell me about Ethan?" "You never gave me the opportunity, Richard. You always made it clear you didn't want our presence in your life. If I had known, what would you have done differently?" Richard didn't know how to answer. He had spent years building walls around his perfect life, avoiding anything that could compromise his image of success. Ethan noticed the adults were getting lost in recriminations and decided to take the initiative. "Can I go upstairs to see Jacob?" Jennifer hesitated for a moment, but then nodded positively. Ethan went up the stairs, followed by the adults. In the room, Jacob was awake, playing with his fingers and looking around with the typical curiosity of babies. "Hi, bro," said Ethan softly, approaching the crib. Jacob looked directly at Ethan and for the first time since he was born gave a big smile. "Look at that," whispered Angela. "He recognizes his brother." Jennifer watched the scene with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she felt threatened by Ethan's presence. On the other, she couldn't deny the evident connection between the two boys. Ethan picked up his magnifying glass and began showing the details of the room to Jacob, as if introducing the world to his younger brother. "Jacob, this is our family," he said, pointing to the adults. "We have 2 moms and a dad who are learning to be a family." Ethan's innocent observation made everyone reflect on the complexity of the situation, but also on the possibilities it offered. Richard approached the crib and for the first time truly looked at Jacob, while also seeing Ethan in him. The similarities were undeniable: the same expressive eyes, the same nose shape, the same delicate hand gestures. "Ethan," said Richard with a choked voice, "I need to apologize to you." "Why, Uncle?" "For being unfair to you and your mum, for closing my heart to you." "Uncle Richard, you don't need to apologize. Now you know the truth, and we can be a real family." Jennifer, who had remained silent until then, approached as well. "Ethan, do you really want to be Jacob's brother?" "Of course, Aunt Jennifer. I always wanted to have a little brother, and Jacob is the most handsome brother in the world." Ethan's sincerity broke Jennifer's last resistance. She realized she was facing a special child who had faced that whole complex situation with impressive maturity. "And you're not jealous that he grew up in a big house while you—" "Aunt Jennifer, jealous of what? I had the best mom in the world who taught me to be brave and honest. Jacob had you, who will teach him beautiful things too. We're lucky." Ethan's words made Jennifer cry, but this time with emotion. She had never seen a child face such a complicated situation with so much positivity. Angela watched everything with pride in her son, but also with concern about what the future would hold. The revelation of the truth was just the beginning. Now they would need to figure out how to unite 2 such different families. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Martha, who had watched the whole scene from the door, decided to intervene. She knew there was more information that could help the family understand the situation completely. "Excuse me," she said, entering the room. "I think you all need to know a few more things." Everyone turned to Martha, who was carrying a folder with old documents. "I worked at the fertility clinic before coming to work here. I've known your story from the beginning, Mr. Richard." Richard became tense. He didn't expect Martha to know such intimate details of his life. "What else do you know, Martha?" "I know that you purposely chose to use the same genetic material you had donated years before. And I also know that Ethan's mother was a client at the same clinic at the same time. Did you know Ethan was my nephew from the beginning?" "I suspected. When you hired me and mentioned you had a sister-in-law with a son, I made the connection. The dates matched, and when I saw Ethan in person, the similarities with Jacob were obvious." Jennifer was indignant at the revelation. "Martha, why did you never tell us?" "It wasn't my place, Mrs. Jennifer. Besides, I wasn't completely certain until today." Ethan, who had followed the whole conversation, asked a question that surprised everyone. "Martha, do you have the documents that prove we're brothers?" Martha opened the folder and showed copies of the clinic's records, including the dates of the procedures and the donor codes. "Here's all the proof you need." Richard examined the documents carefully. There was no more doubt. Ethan and Jacob were biological brothers, sons of the same donor, himself when he was young. "Does this mean I'm the father of both?" "Biologically, yes," confirmed Martha. "Legally, you're only Jacob's father." Ethan looked at Richard expectantly. "Uncle Richard, do you want to be my father too?" Ethan's direct question caught Richard off guard. He looked at Angela for guidance. "Ethan, this is a very serious decision," said Angela, "and it involves complicated legal matters. But I want him to be my real father, and I want Jacob to be my real brother." Jennifer, who had been silent processing everything, finally spoke. "Ethan, do you understand that if Richard becomes your legal father, this means you would officially be part of our family?" "That's what I want most in the world, Aunt Jennifer." "And you, Angela?" asked Jennifer. "How do you feel about this possibility?" Angela hesitated before answering. On one hand, she wanted Ethan to have a father. On the other, she feared losing her son to a wealthier family. "I just want what's best for Ethan." Ethan noticed his mother's concern and quickly reassured her. "Mom, nobody's going to take me away from you. You're my mother and always will be. I just want to have a bigger family." Richard, who had been observing everything in silence until then, made a decision. "Ethan, do you accept me as your father?" "I do." "And do you accept that I learned to be a better father than I was an uncle?" "I do. But you're already cool. You were just confused." The simplicity of Ethan's answer made Richard smile for the first time since the truth had been revealed. "Then let's talk about how to make this official." In the weeks that followed, the two families worked together with lawyers to regularize the legal situation. Ethan would split time between the two houses, keeping his main home with Angela, but having full access to the mansion and interaction with Jacob. Richard discovered that being Ethan's father was a completely different experience from anything he had imagined. The boy challenged him with smart questions, surprised him with accurate observations, and taught him about a form of love he had never experienced. Ethan took every opportunity to be with Jacob. He brought the magnifying glass to show his younger brother details of the world, told made-up stories on the spot, and was already planning all the adventures they would have together when Jacob grew up. Jennifer, initially resistant, was won over by Ethan's personality. He treated her with genuine affection, helped with Jacob without being asked, and brought a positive energy that the house had never had. "Ethan," she said one day, "do you know you've completely transformed our family?" "For the better, right, Aunt Jennifer?" "Definitely for the better." Angela also benefited from the changes. Richard insisted on helping financially, paying for a nursing course she had always wanted to take. She could work at the same hospital where Mrs. Margaret was a patient, fulfilling an old dream. "Angela," Richard said during one of the weekly visits, I want to apologize to you again for the lost years, the wasted opportunities, the coldness with which I treated you and Ethan. Richard, what matters is the present, and the present is very good. Ethan had become the link that united not just two families but two generations. Mrs. Margaret, recovered from the hospital scare, regularly visited the mansion and delighted in seeing her two grandsons playing together. "Ethan," she said during one of these visits, "you're a very special boy. You managed to unite a family that had been broken for years." "Grandma, the family was never broken. We just didn't know we were family." Ethan's simple wisdom continued to surprise everyone around him. 6 months after the revelation, the family organized a party to celebrate Jacob's first birthday. But in truth, everyone knew they were celebrating much more than that. They were celebrating the birth of a new family configuration. Ethan had prepared a special surprise. With Martha's help, he organized a photo album showing all the special moments they had lived since the truth was revealed. "Jacob," he said, holding his brother in his arms, "this is our family album. When you grow up, you'll see how we discovered we're brothers." Jacob, now almost 1 year old, babbled sounds that Ethan interpreted as approval. The party brought together all the important characters in the story. Mrs. Margaret, radiant seeing the family united. Martha, promoted from housekeeper to household coordinator. Angela, studying nursing and dividing her time between work at the hospital and caring for Ethan. Richard, learning to be a father to 2 children at completely different stages. Jennifer, discovering that being a mother could be even more rewarding when shared. During the party, Ethan gave a speech that surprised everyone. "Guys, I want to thank you for letting me be part of this family. When I found out that Jacob was my brother, I was really happy. But finding out that all of you wanted to accept me was even better." Richard, emotional, replied, "Ethan, we're the ones who should thank you. You taught us that family isn't just about who lives in the same house or has the same last name. Family is about who loves and supports each other, and who investigates when they think something strange," added Ethan, raising his magnifying glass. Everyone laughed, remembering how that little magnifying glass had been crucial to discovering the truth. At the end of the party, when only the closest family remained, Ethan asked to give another speech. "Jacob, I promise I'll be the best big brother in the world. I'll teach you how to use the magnifying glass to discover interesting things. I'll protect you from anything bad. And I'll tell you the story of how we found out we're brothers whenever you want." Jacob, as if understanding every word, stretched out his little arms to Ethan, who carefully picked him up. "And I promise all of you," Ethan continued, "that I'll always tell the truth even when it's hard, because it was the truth that brought us here." Jennifer, who had recorded the entire speech on her phone, whispered to Angela, "That boy is going to change the world someday." "He's already changed ours," Angela replied proudly. Richard approached his 2 sons and hugged them together. "Ethan, Jacob, you are my greatest prides, and I promise I'll be the father you deserve." "Uncle Richard, I mean, Dad," Ethan smiled. "You already are." That night, after everyone had left, Ethan slept in the mansion for the first time. His room had been prepared next to Jacob's so he could take care of his brother whenever necessary. Before sleeping, Ethan took his magnifying glass and looked out the window, observing the stars in the sky. "Jacob," he whispered to his brother sleeping in the next room, "tomorrow I'll show you how bright the stars are when we look carefully. And I'll teach you that sometimes the most beautiful things in life are right near us. We just need to know how to look." In the morning, Ethan woke up to Jacob crying. He ran to his brother's room and picked him up, calming him instantly. "Good morning, bro. Are you hungry?" Jennifer came running, worried about the crying, but stopped at the door when she saw Ethan tenderly caring for Jacob. "Ethan, you're an amazing brother." "Aunt Jennifer, can I prepare Jacob's bottle?" "Of course, dear. Do you want to learn?" "I want to learn everything about taking care of a baby. That way I can help when you and my mom are busy." During breakfast, Richard watched Ethan interacting with Jacob and realized he had lost precious years because of prejudice and wounded pride. "Ethan, do you forgive me for being a bad uncle?" "Dad, you were never bad. You were just lost, but now we've found each other." The word "dad," spoken naturally by Ethan, moved Richard deeply. He had gained not just a son, but a son who accepted him completely, with all his flaws. Angela arrived to pick up Ethan and found a scene that made her smile. Richard teaching Ethan how to bathe Jacob, while Jennifer prepared the meal and Martha organized the house, humming. "Looks like you've already figured out how a big family works," she commented. "Mom!" Ethan ran to hug her. "Jacob can already sit up by himself, and he smiles when I make funny faces." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. And you? Are you enjoying being a big brother? It's the best thing in the world." "When Jacob grows up, I'll teach him how to ride a bike, play soccer, use a magnifying glass to discover things." "What if he doesn't like soccer?" asked Richard, joking. "Then I'll teach him chess, or painting, or anything he wants to learn." Ethan's flexibility and acceptance kept surprising the adults. During the following months, the family's routine settled naturally. Ethan spent 3 days a week at the mansion and 4 with Angela, but weekends always brought everyone together. The boy had become the family's official chronicler, documenting with his magnifying glass and notebook all of Jacob's important moments: the first tooth, the first words, the first steps. "Jacob said Ethan," announced Ethan excitedly during one visit. "It was his second word after mama." "And what was the third?" asked Jennifer. "Dada. He already knows who his family is." Richard was moved to learn he was among his youngest son's first words. Ethan had also become a natural mediator between the adults. When small disagreements arose about Jacob's upbringing or practical family matters, he always found creative solutions that satisfied everyone. "Why don't you do it like this?" he suggested, during a discussion about which school Jacob should attend. "We visit the schools together and ask which one has the best playground. Babies like to play." His simple solutions were often more effective than the adults' complex discussions. One day Ethan arrived at the mansion with a special proposal. "Dad, can I organize a surprise party for Jacob?" "What kind of party, son?" "A sibling discovery party, to celebrate the day we discovered we're family." Richard smiled. Ethan's creativity for celebrating special moments was contagious. "Of course, Ethan. How do you want to organize it?" "I'll make invitations for the whole family, including Grandma Margaret and Martha. And I'll prepare a play telling our story." The sibling discovery party became an annual Miller family tradition. Ethan wrote simple scripts telling the story of their discovery, and everyone participated by playing different characters. Jacob, even though small, had a special role, being himself, while Ethan narrated how the most beautiful baby in the world helped unite a family. During one of these performances, Mrs. Margaret made a comment that became the family motto. "Ethan, you taught us that sometimes it takes a child to show adults how to be a real family." "Grandma, I just used my magnifying glass to see what was already there." 2 years after the discovery, Ethan had grown into an 11-year-old boy who was even more observant and caring. Jacob, now 3 years old, followed him everywhere, imitating his gestures and repeating his words. "Ethan, teach me how to use magnifying glass," asked Jacob one Sunday afternoon. "Of course, bro. Come here, I'll show you how to discover cool things." Ethan picked up a second magnifying glass he'd received from Richard and began teaching Jacob the secrets of careful observation. "Look here, Jacob. See this little flower? With the magnifying glass you can see every tiny detail of the petal. So pretty, Ethan. And you know what's even cooler? When we look at things carefully, we discover the world is full of good surprises." Jacob tried to imitate his older brother's precise movements, concentrating as if learning the most important task in the world. Jennifer watched the scene from the window and commented to Angela, "Ethan is teaching Jacob much more than just how to use a magnifying glass." "He's teaching him to be curious, observant, and careful with discoveries," Angela agreed. "Exactly. And he's teaching him that seeking the truth is worth it." The two women had developed a sincere friendship over the years. Angela helped Jennifer with practical motherhood questions, while Jennifer supported Angela in her studies and career. Richard arrived from work and found his 2 sons in the garden, investigating insects with their magnifying glasses. "What have you discovered today, researchers?" Dad, look, Ethan pointed to an ant. Jacob discovered that ants have 6 legs. 6, repeated Jacob proudly, and I discovered that Jacob is a natural investigator just like me. Richard knelt beside his sons, impressed with Ethan's patience in teaching his younger brother. Ethan, you're being a great teacher. Dad, I like teaching Jacob. He asks smart questions. What kind of questions? Today he asked why ants walk in a line, and why flowers have different colors, and why the sky is blue. And did you know how to answer? Some, yes. Others, I said we'd research together. It's okay not to know everything, right, Dad? Ethan's maturity continued to surprise Richard. No, son. The important thing is to have curiosity to discover. Like you were curious to discover I was your son. Richard smiled. Ethan always found ways to connect daily lessons with the family story. Exactly, Ethan. That evening, during family dinner, Jacob made an important announcement. Ethan is my best friend. And you're mine, bro, replied Ethan, affectionately messing up his brother's hair. Ethan, said Jennifer, do you know you've completely transformed Jacob's life? How so, Mom Jennifer? Ethan had naturally started calling her Mom Jennifer, while Angela was Mom Angela. For him, having 2 mothers was a privilege, not a complication. Jacob was a quiet baby who hardly ever smiled. Since you came into his life, he's always happy. It's because now he has a brother to play with. It's not just that, Ethan, Richard interjected. Jacob learned from you that the world is an interesting place full of discoveries. And I learned from him that teaching someone you love is really fun. Angela watched the conversation with emotion. Seeing Ethan so well integrated into that big family made her feel she had made the right decision accepting Richard's proposal. Ethan, she said, are you happy with our big family? Mom Angela, I can't imagine what life was like before discovering Jacob was my brother. And don't you miss when it was just the 2 of us? I miss our special moments. But now we have special moments with more people. And that's even better. Ethan's answer completely reassured Angela. She had made the right decision. 3 years passed, and Ethan, now 14, had become a responsible and caring teenager. Jacob, at 6, admired him as his personal hero. The family had moved to a bigger house where everyone could live together comfortably. Ethan had his own room, but often slept in Jacob's room when his younger brother had nightmares or simply wanted company. One Saturday morning, Ethan woke up to Jacob gently shaking him. Ethan, wake up. There's a surprise for you. Ethan stretched and looked at his younger brother, who was smiling mysteriously. What surprise, bro? Come see. Jacob pulled Ethan by the hand, leading him to the living room. There, the whole family was gathered around a table with a cake and presents. Surprise! They all shouted in unison. Ethan was confused. It wasn't his birthday or any special date. What are you all celebrating? Richard approached with a document in his hands. Ethan, the official adoption has come through. Now you're legally my son. Ethan was moved. Although he had felt like Richard's son for years, having the legal recognition was special. Really, Dad? Really, son. And there's one more surprise. Jennifer approached with another document. Ethan, I'd like to adopt you too, if you want to, of course. Ethan looked at Angela, worried about her reaction. Mum, Angela, you're not sad. Son, I'm very happy. It means you have 3 people who love you as their son. And that doesn't change anything between us. It doesn't change anything, my love. I'll always be your mother in my heart. Ethan hugged Jennifer emotionally. I accept, Mom Jennifer. Jacob, who had been watching the whole scene without fully understanding, asked an innocent question. Now is Ethan my real brother? Now Ethan is your real brother, confirmed Richard, picking Jacob up. Yay! Shouted Jacob, clapping his hands. The adoption party became one of the most emotional the family had ever experienced. Mrs. Margaret, now 78 years old but still lucid and caring, made a special speech. Ethan, my dear grandson, when you found out that Jacob was your brother, we never imagined that you would unite our family in such a beautiful way. Today, seeing you officially, brothers, I know I did the right thing when I asked my children to reconcile. Ethan hugged his grandmother affectionately. Grandma, it all started with you asking us to get to know each other. And it ended with a family stronger and more united than I ever imagined. Martha, who had become a sort of aunt to the boys, was also present at the party. "Ethan," she said, "do you remember when we met at the hospital?" "Yes, I do, Aunt Martha. You helped me understand that Jacob and I were brothers. And do you remember what I told you about keeping secrets?" "I remember. You said that sometimes the truth can hurt people." "And what did you learn about that?" Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "I learned that the truth only hurts when it's hidden for too long. When we tell the truth at the right time, it heals." Ethan's mature response impressed everyone present. "Exactly, my dear. You understood perfectly." During the party, Ethan asked to make a special speech. "Everyone, I want to thank all who were part of this story. Dad Richard, thank you for learning to love me as a son. Mom Jennifer, thank you for opening your heart to me. Mom Angela, thank you for teaching me to be brave in seeking the truth. Grandma Margaret, thank you for asking the family to come together. Aunt Martha, thank you for helping me discover the truth. And Jacob." Ethan paused, emotional, looking at his younger brother. "Jacob, thank you for being the best brother in the world and for teaching me that family is who we love, no matter how it started." Jacob ran to hug Ethan. "Ethan, you're my favorite brother." "I'm your only brother, silly." "Then you're my favorite brother for real." Everyone laughed at Jacob's impeccable logic. 5 years later, Ethan was graduating from high school and Jacob was in first grade. The family had grown again. Angela had married a colleague from nursing school, a kind man who adored Ethan and whom Jacob considered a special uncle. At Ethan's graduation party, he was chosen as the class speaker. His speech talked about the importance of curiosity, the pursuit of truth, and the value of family. "Colleagues," said Ethan to the audience, "when I was a kid, I got a magnifying glass as a gift. That magnifying glass taught me that when we look at things carefully, we discover details that change everything. Today I want to tell you all, be curious, ask questions, seek the truth, because sometimes a small discovery can transform an entire life." In the audience, Jacob shouted proudly, "That's my brother." Ethan smiled and waved to his family, seeing everyone there: Richard and Jennifer, Angela and her husband, Mrs. Margaret, Martha, and of course, Jacob. After the ceremony, Jacob ran to hug Ethan. "Ethan, I want to be like you when I grow up." "What do you mean, bro?" "I want to be curious, smart, and discover important things. Jacob, you already are all that. You just need to keep being yourself. And I want to have a magnifying glass just like yours. I'll give you my magnifying glass, bro. That way you can keep making discoveries." Ethan took his original magnifying glass, the one that had been with him since he was 9 years old, out of his pocket and solemnly handed it to Jacob. "Now it's your responsibility to use this to discover good things in the world." Jacob took the magnifying glass with reverence, as if he were receiving a treasure. "I promise I'll take good care of it, Ethan." "And do you promise you'll always seek the truth, even when it's hard?" "I promise." Ethan hugged his younger brother, knowing he had fulfilled his promise to be the best big brother in the world. That night, during the celebration dinner, Richard made an exciting announcement. "Ethan, Jacob, I have some news to share with you." "What is it, Dad?" they asked in unison. "We've decided to create a foundation in our family's name, a foundation that will help children in difficult situations discover their talents and possibilities." "That's awesome, Dad," said Ethan. "How will it work?" "We'll offer classes, activities, and opportunities to kids who don't have access to them. And you, Ethan, if you want, can help coordinate some projects." "Of course I want to. And can I teach the kids how to use magnifying glasses to make discoveries?" "Yes, son. That could be one of the special activities." Jacob raised his hand, excited. "Can I help too?" "Of course, Jacob. You can be Ethan's official assistant." "Yay! We're going to be an investigator duo." Ethan smiled, imagining all the children they could help discover their own talents and stories. "Dad, what's the foundation going to be called?" "Ethan Miller Foundation. Discovering Potential." Ethan was moved to hear that the foundation would bear his name. "Why did you choose my name?" Because you taught us that a curious and determined child can change everything, Jennifer explained, and we want other children to learn that too. Jacob made a suggestion. What if we create special magnifying glasses to give to the kids? What a brilliant idea, bro, said Ethan. Colorful magnifying glasses, each one a different color. And each color could represent a type of discovery. Jacob continued, excited. Richard and Jennifer exchanged looks, impressed by their son's creativity. Do you two want to help plan all the details of the foundation? Richard asked. We do, they answered together. In the following months, Ethan and Jacob worked alongside their parents to develop the foundation's programs. Ethan, now 18 and preparing to start college for psychology, applied his knowledge of child development to the projects. Jacob, 11 years old, surprised everyone with creative and sensitive ideas to connect with the children the foundation would serve. The first group of the Ethan Miller Foundation, Discovering Potential, consisted of 20 children between 6 and 12 years old, all from families facing financial difficulties. Ethan prepared a special presentation for the first day. Kids, do you know what this is? He asked, showing his original magnifying glass. A magnifying glass, several shouted at once. That's right, and do you know what it's for? To see small things, said an 8-year-old girl. Very good. But I'm going to teach you that the magnifying glass is for much more than that. The magnifying glass helps us discover amazing things about ourselves and the world. Ethan told his own story, adapted for the children to understand. He talked about how he discovered he had a brother, how curiosity led him to ask important questions, and how the search for truth had transformed his life. And do you know what was the most important discovery I made with my magnifying glass? Ethan asked. What? The children asked curiously. I discovered that every person has something special and unique, and when we look carefully, we always find it. Jacob, who was watching his brother's presentation, raised his hand. Ethan, tell them about the colored magnifying glasses. Ethan smiled and showed a colorful box. Each of you will get a special magnifying glass. Red for those who like discovering things about nature, blue for those who like discovering stories, green for those who like discovering how things work, yellow for those who like discovering artistic talents, and purple for those who like discovering how to help others. The children were delighted with the idea. What if I like discovering several things? Asked a boy. Then you can switch magnifying glasses whenever you want, Jacob replied. The important thing is to keep discovering. During the following months, Ethan and Jacob monitored the development of the children at the foundation. They saw talents being discovered, self-esteem being built, and life stories being transformed. One of the children, Emma, 9 years old, discovered she had a special talent for observing plants and animals. Another Tyler, 10 years old, discovered he could invent amazing stories. Brandon, 7 years old, discovered he had a knack for fixing broken toys. Ethan, Emma said during one of the activities, do you know what I discovered with my green magnifying glass? What did you discover, Emma? I discovered that the plants in my house were sad because no one talked to them. Now I talk to them every day, and they're more beautiful. Ethan smiled, seeing a bit of himself in the girl's curiosity. And you, Tyler, what discovery did you make today? I discovered a story about a boy who had a magic magnifying glass and found out he was a baby's brother, said Tyler, referencing Ethan's story. It's a beautiful story, isn't it? It's the most beautiful one I know, and it's true, right, Ethan? Yes, it's true, Tyler. And you know what's even cooler? True stories are always the most beautiful. End of story. And you, who followed this beautiful journey of Ethan and Jacob. Leave in the comments which part of the story moved you the most. Do you believe a child can really unite a family like Ethan did? Tell us about your own family discoveries and how curiosity has already transformed your life. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories that touch the heart.